January 1943. Somewhere over the darkened edge of occupied Europe, the night carried no moon, no silver line on the horizon, only wind, cold metal, and the low, unbroken thunder of engines cutting through absolute black. Below, fields, rivers, and towns dissolved into a single void. Above, transport aircraft moved in long, patient lines, navigation lights extinguished, crews flying by instruments and memory alone. Inside the fuselages, men stood hooked to steel cables, boots braced, parachutes heavy on their shoulders. The only sound was the steady vibration of engines, and, in some aircraft, the soft crackle of chewing gum being worked between clenched teeth. This moment mattered because it represented something the German High Command believed impossible. Since the early victories of 1939 and 1940, German doctrine had been built on control of airspace, of movement, of night itself. Darkness was considered a shield, a barrier that protected rear areas from sudden intrusion. Large airborne operations were expected to require daylight visibility and predictability. Moonless nights were thought to be hostile even to the attacker. Yet by 1943 and 1944, American planners had reached a different conclusion. Night was no longer an obstacle, it was a weapon. Oh, he's a weapon. German generals expected carefully staged assaults, set-piece landings, frontal pressure, predictable axes of advance. What they experienced instead was chaos arriving from the sky. Paratroopers fell in scattered patterns across countryside maps that instantly became obsolete. Roads filled with rumors before they filled with troops. Commanders received reports of landings everywhere and nowhere at once. Units prepared to repel attacks that never came, while real objectives were seized by small groups operating independently. Field reports from German headquarters repeatedly described the same phenomenon, confusion disproportionate to the actual numbers involved. In Sicily, in Italy, and later in Normandy, German officers noted that airborne landings at night created the impression of overwhelming force. Signals intelligence failed, lines were cut. Runners never returned. Darkness amplified every sound, every shadow, every uncertainty. The soldiers on the ground had expected to hear artillery first. Instead, they heard wind in parachute canopies, the distant cough of engines fading into nothing, and then silence. They expected an enemy bound by rules. Instead, they encountered men landing miles off target, forming ad hoc units, advancing without orders, driven by training and momentum rather than rigid command. American after-action reports confirm this disorder, but from the opposite perspective. Drop zones missed by kilometers, units scattered across hedgerows and villages, equipment lost, men killed before touching the ground. Yet the same documents record something else: adaptability. Paratroopers regrouped under hedges, in barns, beside roads they could not name. They moved anyway. German commanders were trained to read battlefields as structured systems. What confronted them in these moonless nights was something else entirely, a form of warfare that refused symmetry. A single platoon could tie down a regiment. A false report could redirect an entire counterattack. Darkness multiplied American presence beyond its physical reality. One symbolic sound threaded through these nights: the engines. The deep, rhythmic hum of American transport aircraft. It was not sharp like a fighter, not sudden like artillery. It was persistent, methodical. It arrived on schedule and returned again the next night. To German troops, the sound came to represent something unsettling, not desperation, but capacity, not risk, but repetition. Alongside that sound was a quieter symbol noted in captured diaries and interrogations: American supplies. Paratroopers carried more than weapons. They carried rations unfamiliar to European soldiers: chocolate, cigarettes, chewing gum. Items that seemed trivial, even absurd during combat. Yet these objects told a story. They suggested an army that could afford excess. An army that expected to remain in the field, not merely survive it. German logistical reports from late 1943 onward increasingly contrast shortages with the enemy's apparent abundance. Fuel rationed, ammunition counted all, food stretched. Against this, American airborne units appeared equipped not just for battle, but for endurance. The symbolism was not lost on those who observed it. These moonless drops forced a shift in perception. Night could no longer be trusted. Rear areas no longer existed. Control dissolved once darkness fell. German defensive doctrine began to fracture under the realization that the battlefield now extended vertically, invisibly, and without warning. For American forces, the experience hardened a different belief. That initiative mattered more than precision. That democracy's strength lay not in flawless execution, but in resilience, the ability of individuals to act when plans failed. Scattered landings became a feature, not a flaw. Confusion became leverage. By the time Allied armies advanced inland, many German generals already understood what these nights had revealed. They were no longer facing an enemy constrained by scarcity or caution.